Yeah, so I've been studying this stuff for a frighteningly long period of time now. I got started on this my first semester of graduate school, which is like almost 40 years ago. So been studying this stuff for a long time. It's really exciting to see how the field is developing psych of religion, spirituality more generally. Um, and just as a heads up, I we are working on the third edition of our handbook of the psychology of religion, spirituality. Ray Paluzzi and I had the first edition come out in 2005. And so now it's 2026. So we're looking at like how things have changed over decades. And it's just so neat to see how some things that were really hot like 20 years ago are not, and some new things have come along. So, and Daryl Van Tongeren has joined us as an editor. So we're really excited about that. And so some of the things I'm thinking about now as I go through the work that I've been doing is, where is this headed? Where is this going? And so I'd be really interested in hearing your thoughts about that too at the end. So when I give talks like this, and you may be in the same boat, typically start out by talking about why religion, spirituality important, because a lot of academic audiences really haven't thought about it, don't pay much attention to it. But I don't really think that I need to spend a lot of time convincing you all that religion, spirituality is important in people's lives. There's a lot of changes going on in the United States, and more people being not affiliated with traditional religions. That being said, most people still believe in God, still feel like religion is important in their lives, and still attend worship services, although that does seem to be the more formal components of religious and spiritual involvement seem to be still on a decline. So you could spend some time talking about religion, spirituality. Um, there have been a lot of definitions that have been proposed, and some of the things that, we have to struggle with this a lot in our work, what these are. There's just not good consensus of how religiousness and spirituality are related. Sometimes people talk about religiousness as this broad concept, and spirituality is a part of, but not all of religiousness. Some people talk about spirituality is really broad, and religiousness is part of spirituality. Some people talk about them as overlapping, but also distinct. So there's areas of overlap, but some parts of spirituality are clearly not religious, and some parts of religiousness are clearly not what we would call spiritual, or that the other version of this is that they're totally distinct concepts. Um, so a lot of times in the work that we do, we cheat, and we call it religion slash spirituality, with the idea that we kind of know and you kind of know what we're talking about, but we don't often get into um, trying to come up with those definitions. And in the last version of our handbook, Doug Oman had done a chapter with, I think he had 30 definitions of religion and 30 definitions of spirituality. And he just revised that chapter for our new handbook. And I mean, people are still coming up with new, there's been a lot of more efforts to try to revise that. And, in all the years that I've seen this work, I don't think anybody's ever come to any consensus that how these are related. So I talk a lot about religion, spirituality, and um, we know that. So for this talk, I've kind of stuck with spirituality, but you kind of know what I mean, right? So spirituality is multidimensional. Just been a lot of different ways that people have studied religion, spirituality, and these are just some of them. Things like affiliation, or a person's personal history, growing up in a religious household, specific beliefs like belief in God or beliefs about God, public behaviors like service attendance, and private behaviors like private prayer, daily spiritual experiences, and so on. I won't read the whole list, but the point is, uh, a lot of times when we talk about this, we talk about it very broadly, but these different aspects often are shown in research to have different effects. So I think it is important when you're reviewing literature like this or thinking about it is to think what specific components we're really talking about because they are different. So in the area of spirituality and physical health, which is kind of what I'm sticking with today, not the mental health part, um, really thinking about spirituality and how does it affect, our mortal bodies, our physical well-being. Um, there's copious literature linking religion, spirituality, and health. These are just covers of a few of the books. Harold Koenig, in particular, has done quite a lot of compilation, gathering literature from all corners of the research sphere to have this. The latest edition of his handbook is literally like this thick. It's really a lot of work, and people are very interested in this topic. So there's just a lot of work out there to get a handle on, and which is kind of nice when you're trying to figure this out. So the model kind of looks like spirituality might affect physical health through a couple different mechanisms, physiological processes, and health behaviors. So in the health psych literature, those physiological processes, even though it's a mediation model, those are called direct effects because something is happening that directly impacts how your body's functioning, like your cardiovascular system, your immune system, your endocrine system, the hormones like stress hormones. And then health behaviors are considered more of an indirect pathway. So there's some other behavior that then has an impact on physical health. So diet, physical activity, substance use, sleep, or treatment adherence are common health behaviors that are looked at as maybe a mechanism linking a psychosocial factor with physical health outcomes. And into this mix, one of the things that I bring to this that's kind of unique is really thinking about religion or spirituality as this global meaning system. And so that global meaning system is what is sort of driving the differential effects that spirituality might have on both physiological processes and health behaviors. When I say global meaning, I'm thinking about two different parts. So global meaning is sort of our general orienting system. Like we all have one and they're all unique. We have a set of beliefs, a general understanding of how the universe works, our self-identity, who we are vis-a-vis the larger world, how much control we have over what happens to us, how much control do other people have, how just or fair is the world, how predictable is the world, how vulnerable are we to bad things happening, for example, or good things happening, or anything happening. So we all have these sets of beliefs, and we also have sets of goals or motivations. These are ideals or states towards one is motivated to attain or maintain, and the pathways for achieving those goals, which is typically called values. And when I think about goals in terms of a person's global meaning, I think not just about where they're going, but also what they already have. Because a lot of times, working to maintain what we have is as important or more important than where we're going. So, for example, your health is really important to you, or your relationships are really important to you, just keeping them. And if something threatens those or you lose those, you recognize how much of your life is oriented to maintaining those. Um, so those two things, people's beliefs and their goals, lead to this third component of global meaning, which is typically what people talk about when you read meaning in life research, and people talk about like how religion gives you meaning in life, or a lot of people find meaning through their religion. It's that subjective sense of meaning. So my life is meaningful, my life is purposeful, I feel like my life matters, I feel like I know where I'm going. That sense of comprehensibility, the world makes sense, I have a purpose, and I matter. So that is, according to the framework that I use, what goes into global meaning. And what's really interesting and fun about studying psych of religion, spirituality with that lens is that you can look at how people's religiousness or spirituality influences all those pieces. So obviously there are direct religious beliefs like theodicies, why is there suffering and where is God in that? Is there sin? Is there free will? Are religious identities? And what are humans sinful? Is there an afterlife? Does God have control? But those religious and spiritual beliefs also then would inform just more general what psychology would consider beliefs, like a sense of a locus of control and things like that. And the same with goals, that there are obviously specifically religious goals, but also religiousness or spirituality can infuse a lot of the other goals that we have in our lives. And so sanctification is a process by which goals become imbued with sort of a sacred quality. So that is part of it. But a lot of the goals that we have and a lot of the values that we have are, either informed by or adjacent to religion, spirituality. And then the sense of meaning in life can also be strongly affected. And if you are a person who studies meaning in life or reads about that, there's very close links between people's religious and spiritual lives and their sense of meaning and purpose. So, thinking about that in terms of how it might influence our physical health, we've conducted some research both in cancer survivors that's been funded by Livestrong Foundation back in the days before Lance Armstrong had his fall from grace. He had a foundation, and that's one of the early grants that I got that really helped promote the research that we've been doing in cancer survivorship. And then more recently, we've been funded by the National Cancer Institute to continue that work. And also in congestive heart failure, which is, cancer survivorship is generally a fairly positive group to work with because they've survived cancer. They're kind of on the other side. They still have a lot of concerns and so on. But congestive heart failure is a condition that is pretty grave and serious with a high mortality rate. So kind of two very different populations. And we've also been supported in the congestive heart failure research by NIH, so the National Institute on Aging, and also private foundations, including Templeton, American Heart Association, and Fetzer back in the day when they used to make grants too. So been studying both of these groups for quite a long time. So in the context of cancer, we've talked about cancer in a cancer continuum way, thinking about where people are on that quote unquote cancer journey. So people living with cancer, that's when people are diagnosed and active treatment. Living through cancer, there's a transition that people go through where they become uh, survivors, and that early period of trying to have a new normal in your life. And then living beyond cancer is longer term survivorship. So typically when people are 5 years and beyond, that's considered a longer term survivor. And there's very different concerns that people have when they obviously when they're in treatment. Sometimes the treatments are very intense and people are really just focused on getting through that and hopefully surviving and with as little damage as possible. I have a friend who's caring for her husband who's in treatment, and she said it's all cancer all the time. That's what it's like for her and him. So just that's their focus. So we're kind of not, we don't really study people who are like in active treatment. We're really kind of looking at that early survivorship period and then longer term survivorship. It's a big group. There are about 18.1 every year. That number goes up because the good news is a lot of people survive cancer. And so in our country, it's estimated that in the next 6 years, there will be, by 2032, 22 million cancer survivors. And that's happening for a couple of reasons. One is screening. So people are being caught early, which gives them better a likelihood of survival, and the treatments have improved, especially with immunotherapies and some of the new methods that they're using for cancer treatment. It is still, still not great, but it's certainly getting better all the time. So, so it's a big group. It's an important group. And our question is, how does spiritual meaning influence survivors' health? And so, we've looked at meaning in terms of a number of different places in that cancer uh, situation. So attributions for the cancer, why is it happening to me? That sort of selective incidence kind of attribution. And what does cancer mean for me or my life? Like, how do they appraise what cancer means to them? So we were looking at um, in our cancer survivorship sample the control of the cause. Like, did you get cancer because of something that you did, or something about you, or was God in control of the cause of your cancer? And then we asked the same questions in terms of cure, right? So, were there things that you did that helped you to become a cancer survivor, or was that up to God? And we had looked at both distress and perceived growth. And in terms of the control of the cause of the cancer, people who felt that it was their own cause, you might not be surprised, had more distress. Um, and who felt that it was God who caused their cancer, also more distress, but also a sense that they had grown as a result of their cancer. In terms of the control of the cure, if they felt that it was stuff that they did to help them, they had less stress and more perceived growth. And if they thought God was in control of their cure, they just had more perceived growth, but not less control or less stress. So it's kind of interesting to see the ways that people make meaning of their cancer using sort of religious framing, and that it has these impacts. Um, we looked at some aspects of beliefs. I mentioned a few of those earlier, that people have a lot of different kinds of beliefs about God, as well as does God exist, but also beliefs about suffering and why things happen to them. And this was results of a qualitative study that this is a group that I work with at Biola. Um, a woman in a conflictual marriage questioned why she should get cancer rather than her husband. Why God does my husband choose wrong and he chooses the world, and I'm choosing you and I keep getting beat up? It's kind of that thing, why do bad things happen to good people? So you kind of get a sense of the spiritual struggle that is occurring based on someone's understanding of their situation. And another said, when I got cancer, I'm like, what did I do that was so bad? I didn't kill anybody. I didn't steal. I didn't go rob houses or murder people. I'm not a bad guy. And here all of a sudden I've got this death sentence. So you can sort of see the ways that those kinds of beliefs can influence uh, the specific struggles that people experience in their cancer. Religion also provides a lot of resources for people who are coping with cancer. So their relationship with God and their congregational support, which for a lot of people is, central to getting through. Religious narratives about what is happening to them, relying on their sacred literature and rituals to help, and also experiencing God or the divine through daily spiritual experiences. So we were interested in whether the survivor's sense of daily spiritual experiences related to actual things they were doing for their health as survivors. So this is a mediation model of daily spiritual experiences, which was associated with adherence to doctor's advice, and through the psychological emotion of feeling self-assured, and that actually mediated the effect, partially mediated to the point where the direct effect wasn't significant. And religious and spiritual coping, that's a big one. Ken Pargament has done work on this area for decades now, and many people have been using the religious coping scales to study religion and how it affects coping. So we've been looking at it in terms of the context of cancer, and there's lots of different kinds of religious coping that people do. Um, in this, I know it looks kind of complicated, but really we were just trying to compare a sense of agency, so a person's locus of control with their religiousness. So a secular versus a religious kind of personal characteristic to see how that predicted perceived growth in subsequent perceived growth. And so what we saw is that all the growth that the people experienced in this complex model of personal control and God control was all mediated through religious coping. So that link between, and I'll talk a little bit about perceived growth in a little while, because that's something that is of interest to a lot of people. But we see the links between religiousness in lots of different dimensions of religiousness and growth. That's a really robust finding. Spiritual struggle. Julie Exline is the world leader here in this area of spiritual struggle. This occurs when some aspect of religion or spiritual belief, practice, or experience becomes a focus of negative thoughts or emotions, concerns, or conflicts. It includes things like anger at God, abandonment by God, feeling you're sinful or troubled by doubts, negative interactions with fellow congregants. So there's lots of different kinds of spiritual struggles, lots of flavors of it. And this is a study I did with Julie with our cancer survivors as part of a bigger paper. And here we're really looking at, I mean, the most important thing is that anger at God is strongly related to adjustment, negative adjustment. And the more anger that people have towards God, the worse their psychological well-being in terms of positive and negative aspects. So spiritual struggle is, I think Julie usually talks about as being fairly uncommon, or people don't report that much of it, but it is highly related to doing worse in pretty much any population it's looked at. And we found that in our study looking at health behaviors again. So we saw that religious struggle was the variable it was related to is drinking. So survivors, because there's an association between alcohol use and cancer, obviously survivors are better off not drinking. So religious struggle was related to, negatively related to less drinking, in other words, related to more drinking, and partly through emotion of guilt. All right. The spiritual well-being scale, you may or may not be familiar with this. This is a scale that's used a lot in the cancer context, as well as some other health and other populations, but a lot of the work is done in cancer. And it has 3 subscales. So when you think about spiritual well-being, there's a meaning, there's a peace, and there's a faith. So meaning is, I feel like my life is full of purpose. Peace is, I feel a sense of contentment. And faith is, I find comfort in my religion. And we've done a couple studies with this, finding that this is a study. I just highlighted the findings. So for mental health, meaning of changes in meaning and peace from baseline to 6 months, actually even controlling for a bunch of other factors, we found that people who grew in their meaning and peace had better mental health and less cancer-related distress, but it wasn't related to that perceived growth. The faith, on the other hand, was not related to mental health. It wasn't related to cancer distress, but it was related to cancer-related growth. So, it's so this is why you need to study the pieces separately, right? Okay, so let me just go over to congestive heart failure, talk about a few of the studies we've done here. As I mentioned, this is a high mortality illness. About 6 million Americans have congestive heart failure, which is quite a few. It's an impaired ability of the heart to pump blood, and it usually happens after people have some other coronary event or some cardiovascular disease, that their heart becomes inefficient. And when your heart becomes inefficient, you have shortness of breath, dyspnea, so painful breathing, fluid retention, your heart is just not working very well, and you're very tired. About 50% die within 5 years. As you can imagine, mental and physical quality of life are significantly impacted. And also, people with CHF tend to have high rates of depression. So we were looking again at some aspects of religiousness. In this case, we had religious and spiritual support, commitment, using EV scale, and positive and negative religious coping. And so, these are all in the same regression model, so they're all competing for variance. And what we saw when all were considered together is that religious commitment was the only thing that was really driving congestive heart failure specific behavior. So when you have CHF, low salt diet, uh, uh, cut down on fluids, weigh yourself every day. So there's a bunch of things that they need to do. And people who had higher religious commitment were better at sticking with that. In terms of diet, nothing predicted people following their diet. In terms of substance use, that was where you saw religious support had a positive effect, and negative religious coping, that spiritual struggling stuff, had a negative effect. So and one other thing about I should mention about heart failure is it's a very expensive disease, and that's one of the reasons the government's very interested in it, is because these are older people, so it affects our hospital system and Medicare. Rehospitalization is a big deal because people go to the hospital a lot, and if they don't get stabilized, they go home and come right back, and it's just really very taxing on the healthcare system as well as on the person. So hospitalization is a big outcome, and we actually saw that religious struggle was related to not just things like less life satisfaction and more depression, but that it actually was related to, well, there's mental health, but to nights hospitalized, which was really pretty cool, and that's controlling for age, education, number, comorbidity. So it was a pretty interesting finding that the spiritual struggle seemed to be important there. Um, some other research that we did, going back to that spiritual well-being measure, we had looked at physical health quality of life and mental health quality of life. And the only component that was really coming out of the three measures, the faith, the meaning, and the peace, was the sense of spiritual peace. So social support was related to mental health and hope, both marginally, but that's a pretty chunky beta there. So people who felt at peace had higher mental health quality of life. Really didn't seem to be related to physical health quality of life. But we also did a mortality analysis. We had, thanks to Templeton, we were able to go back and do a longitudinal analysis of these folks, and many of them had died by the time we went back. This is 5 years later. So spiritual peace, if the line on the top is people who had most days to many times a day felt spiritual peace, versus those who did not, had never or almost no days. So spiritual peace, and we in these analyses, we controlled for a lot of stuff. We controlled for health behaviors and comorbidities and ejection fraction and a lot of stuff, and we still saw the effect on mortality. Our more current study of cancer survivors, we just wrapped that up last year. I won't go into all the background detail, but we followed people over 5 time points across the transition. So we really tried to get people prior, while they were still in treatment, and then at the time they were being discharged from active treatment, and then a follow up. And so we have both. Well, we have a pretty good mix of folks, and they have breast, prostate, and colorectal cancer. So it's a little bit of a mixed sample. And one of the studies, I don't have time to go into this in too much detail, but we looked at that spiritual well-being measure, and we saw these people in the different groups. So in the so we're doing trajectory analysis, really cool. And what you see at the bottom, the time points, we were able with imputation to, so we have 5 time points for every person, and they were spread out around the period of the transition from active treatment. So we were able to center each participant and have more data thanks to imputation from. So we have 5 time points before and 5 time points after active treatment. So these are all centered around the transition, which is at right between 5 and 6 on the bottom. So we were able to look at how there are subgroups within our survivors of people in who are either doing pretty well, and if they change across the transition. So this first group in the red, we call that high and increasing, and that's about 48% of the participants. And again, this piece is a really important thing, right? So the transitioning from moderate to high, this green, so they're going through cancer treatment, and they go through it and they keep improving for a year out. That is about 11%. But then you have this group that's low and stable, and that's 34%. So over a third of the patients are pretty low in that spiritual piece, and that might be a group that warrants attention or some kind of intervention. And then at the end, that the transitioning people who were moderate through the treatment, and at the end of treatment really kind of took a plunge and maybe started to come back a little bit, but that was about 7% of the sample. And then in the paper, which if you're interested, I'd be happy to send it to you, but we also looked at like coping and other factors as predictors of who's in which group. And we did the same with the other 3. So again, with faith, we've got this high stable group that was about 8%. We have a low stable group, which is about 34%. So, these are people who are not particularly finding comfort in their faith. And the third group is moderate increasing, is 21%. So you can imagine people were kind of like doing okay through their cancer transition. And then the last group are people who were moderate and stable, which was about 37%. And then just for the meaning, just so in case you're curious, the meaning group, this high group, was only 3%. This group with moderate and decreasing, 16%. Moderate, this green line, is 15%. The blue is transitioning moderate to low, is 5%. And then this last group is transitioning moderate to high, was where most people were at 62%. So there's a lot to be done, I think, with spiritual well-being and looking at it. So this is stuff that I literally just yesterday got the results of our looking at cancer-related distress, because a lot of the literature in cancer survivorship is on more general distress like depression, anxiety, but there's also things specific to cancer like fear of recurrence, which really dogs people, and impact of event scale measures sort of PTSD-like symptoms. So a lot of cancer patients have kind of like trauma reactions that persist. So they have these not necessarily PTSD, but PTSD symptoms. And then the perceived growth from the cancer experience. So we were really interested in how longitudinally that might relate. And what we saw is that peace showed up. Can't really see this. I just did this morning, but peace is negatively related to fear of recurrence. It's negatively related to impact of the cancer in terms of PTSD symptoms. Meaning is also related to that in a negative way. And then faith doesn't help people with those things, but it does seem associated with more perceived growth from the cancer experience. And I just want to mention the perceived growth is something that has caught a lot of attention. It's something people really want to believe about post-traumatic growth, that people can grow through traumatic experiences. And we're very interested in those perceptions, but they are only perceptions. And the research that has looked at the validity of people's ability to to report on how much they've grown from their cancer is really not strong. They're not really able to do it accurately, as far as we could tell. So I'm trying to be careful and say perceived growth or perceived post-traumatic growth. Um, so anyway, conclusion: spirituality variously manifested, predicts many aspects of health. There's some inconsistent results. It seems to depend on specific aspect of spirituality and specific aspect of well-being. We need better understanding of the linkages. And one of the things I'm working on right now with the Templeton Religious Trust is looking at mediation. What are those mediators between religion, spirituality, and all these physical and mental health outcomes? And some of them are things like social support or meaning in life, some of the things that people have studied. So I'm kind of trying to do a systematic review, no, scoping review, just kind of looking at what those options are, and then maybe coming up with some directions for future research. And these may usefully inform interventions and even prevention efforts. So thank you. I think we